The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, thanks, Jen. We have Professor Timothy Snyder joining us tonight. I've been wanting to hear from him about the situation we are now living through. And he has an important new piece in the Boston Globe where he outlines what he calls for Donald Trump the political logic of Donald Trump's lawlessness. And he finds historical parallels in other authoritarians. Really important stuff. We're going to get to that tonight.
Oh, well, look for, I can't speed read it, so I'm going to listen first, and then
Right.
I'm going to read the article, which I haven't read yet. But he's always an interesting person to talk to.
He is, and we're gonna hear from him soon. Thanks, John.
Great. Have a good night.
Thank you. Well, being Stephen Miller means never having to say you're sorry. After the murder of Alex Preddy on Saturday morning by agents sent to Minneapolis by Donald Trump at Stephen Miller's urging, Stephen Miller decided it was his turn to fire shots at Alex Preddy, and he did. We've all seen the video of the most cowardly federal agents ever caught on video calmly walking backwards, backing away from Alex Preddy as they were firing at least 6 additional shots into that motionless body lying face down on the pavement, completely unthreatening to anyone. There is no evidence in any of the videos that the first shot fired at Alex Preddy from inches away from his body was justified. No evidence justifying even the first shot. And it's very likely that that shot fired at such close range killed Alex Preddy. And what is also very clear in the videos about that first shot is that one of the agents had already removed Alex Preddy's licensed handgun from Alex Preddy's right hip, a handgun that Alex Preddy never touched during the incident. All the videos prove that. Videos show one agent reaching down, grabbing that handgun and rushing it away so that every shot fired at Alex Preddy was fired at a completely unarmed man. There is absolutely no conceivable legal justification for any of the shots fired at that unarmed man. The possible human explanation for the shots include panic, abject fear, stupidity, incompetence, recklessness, and indeed viciousness that we have seen displayed by those federal agents in so many situations on those streets. But none of those emotional reasons are legal justifications. Every one of the agents around Alex Preddy's body, every one of them, could fully and easily see the entirety of Alex Preddy's body as they were backing away from him. They could all see what he was doing, and they could all see what he was not doing, meaning he was not moving. And only 2 of the 6 agents in equal positions to fire on Alex Preddy decided that he should be shot. The proof of the illegitimacy and the outright criminality of the shooting of Alex Preddy is the number of agents in exactly the same positions who didn't even reach for their guns because they saw absolutely no reason to reach for a gun because they knew that Alex Preddy never presented a threat to anybody. But those shots kept coming, as many as 10 shots. And always remember in this case that the strongest prosecution evidence about just how unreasonable it was to shoot Alex Preddy is provided by every federal agent there in exactly the same position who did not shoot him, because they all knew that there was nothing threatening to them. They were experiencing exactly the same threat from Alex Preddy, which was no threat at all. And no reasonable human being would ever have fired a shot at Alex Preddy lying face down on that pavement. That's what makes it murder. And Saturday morning, when Stephen Miller heard about it in Washington, he decided Now it was his turn. Stephen Miller decided he needed to get his shot in at Alex Preddy. And so he did. Stephen Miller's weapon of choice for his participation in the assassination of Alex Preddy was not a handgun. It was his phone. It was his social media account. With Alex Preddy's parents, Susan and Michael Preddy, and his younger sister, Michaela Preddy, reeling in the pain and the agony of the news of the sudden death of Alex Preddy, Stephen Miller used his social media account to call Alex Preddy, quote, a domestic terrorist, and to describe what Alex Preddy did when he was trying to help a woman who was being illegally assaulted by federal agents as, quote, a domestic terrorist tried to attack federal law enforcement. That was a lie. Stephen Miller said Alex Preddy was trying to assassinate them. That was a lie. Stephen Miller knew that was a lie when he said that. The video was already public, proving that that was a lie. Did Stephen Miller pause to say to himself, maybe I shouldn't try to use this one for propaganda? Maybe there are some suffering parents out there. Maybe there's a suffering little sister out there. Did just a flicker of humanity pass through Stephen Miller's depraved mind as he was willfully typing that lie into his weapon of choice, his phone? The only person working for Donald Trump suspected of being more cruel than Donald Trump is Stephen Miller, and so the answer is no. We have a right to believe that not one humane thought went through Stephen Miller's mind about the man whose character he decided to assassinate after Donald Trump's agents assassinated him. Did Stephen Miller think, I wonder what he does for a living? What if he does something honorable for a living? Is there anything that could happen that could make my declaration that he's a domestic terrorist intent on assassinating federal agents somehow come back to haunt me, Stephen Miller? Of course, the problem is nothing can haunt Stephen Miller. And so reports indicate that Stephen Miller has been having a rough time for the first time in his life in the Trump White House. According to the New York Times, Stephen Miller was shut out of an important meeting Monday night that went on for 2 hours in the Oval Office with Kristi Noem about this very crisis. Kristi Noem, who was undoubtedly pleading her case to Donald Trump about why it wasn't her fault that everything they said about Alex Preddy was a lie, and everything they're doing in Minneapolis has gotten out of control. Stephen Miller was kept out of that meeting, and that makes it extremely likely that Donald Trump was extremely displeased by that time with Stephen Miller's role in this situation. And 24 hours later, Stephen Miller, who has been forced to remain silent, was also forced to put out a written statement. And this is not the kind of thing that Stephen Miller does. Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem like to go on Fox and celebrate their savagery, celebrate their cruelty, and boast about it as loudly and publicly as they can. And Stephen Miller was obviously ordered by Donald Trump to somehow publicly dismantle his lies about Alex Preddy. And so late last night, Stephen Miller put out a written statement. He didn't go on Sean Hannity's show. He didn't go to some Trump-supporting public forum. He wasn't allowed to do that. Didn't go on a podcast. Just put out a written statement. Very un-Stephen Miller-like. Very low-key, very low visibility. The statement Stephen Miller put out doesn't say, I'm sorry. Stephen Miller tries to blame others for his lies that he chose to deliver to this country. His written statement says, the initial statement from the Department of Homeland Security was based on reports from Customs and Border Patrol on the ground. Additionally, the White House provided clear guidance to the Department of Homeland Security that the extra personnel that had been sent to Minnesota for force protection should be used for conducting fugitive operations to create a physical barrier between the arrest teams and the disruptors. We are evaluating why the Border Patrol team may not have been following protocol. It was a Customs and Border Patrol team that murdered Alex Preddy. And now Stephen Miller is saying, they weren't supposed to go there and murder protesters. That wasn't the protocol. They were simply supposed to create arrest teams and protester teams and make it all work together very smoothly. Stephen Miller now says they may not have been following protocol. That's his phrase for murder. And he's right. They were not following any legal protocol on that street at any moment in those videos. And today, the White House decided they had to add a cleanup to Stephen Miller's pathetic attempt to clean up his statement. The White House, continuing its rhetorical retreat, issued this statement about Stephen Miller's retreat. Per his statement, Stephen was specifically referring to general guidance given to ICE that the extra personnel that had been sent to Minnesota was for force protection. It should be used to create a physical barrier between the arrest teams and the disruptors, and officials would be examining why additional force protection assets may not have been present to support the operation. Okay, so officials will not be examining why they committed murder. They'll be examining why they weren't standing where we thought we should have them stand. And so now both Stephen Miller and whoever is putting out the ridiculous statements for the White House cannot come up with a single line in their new statements of defense. Not one word of defense for why the killing of Alex Preddy is not a murder. He's not a domestic terrorist anymore in Stephen Miller's statements. There's no attempt in the new Stephen Miller statement to claim that Alex Preddy was not murdered. There's no defense offered. There's no attempt in the new White House statement to claim that Alex Preddy was not murdered by those agents. There's no attempt to claim the agents were justified in any way. That's because they know they would have to invent evidence that is not in any of the videos to justify the killing of Alex Preddy, which is absolutely not justifiable. Our first guest tonight says that there is, for Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, a political logic for Donald Trump's lawlessness. Tonight, the Trump White House is afraid of publicly advancing that logic. And Stephen Miller is doing his version of an apology. And the Attorney General of the United States went to Minneapolis today and did not make a public appearance there. She simply tweeted that she was there. That is as low profile as any Trump cabinet member has ever been in one of Donald Trump's invasion sites in America. Except, of course, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who is even more low profile today. She's invisible, totally invisible. In the middle of this crisis, she's hiding somewhere, in Washington maybe, and saying nothing, being allowed to say nothing, because Donald Trump has told them all to shut up. Donald Trump and his regime is in retreat tonight. Stephen Miller is in retreat tonight because the protesters are winning. Chris Hayes is doing invaluable reporting from the streets of Minneapolis today, in which he reports that there is no sensation among the people there of a reduction of tensions in Minneapolis at this point, or even a reduction in invasion forces. But remember, there are always two things about Trump world, what they say and what they do. And right now, what they are saying is that they are retreating. Donald Trump is talking about his good phone calls with the governor of Minnesota and with the mayor of Minneapolis, people who he was attacking last week. And Donald Trump is silencing Stephen Miller and keeping him out of the room. He is silencing Kristi Noem. He is silencing his attorney general today on this subject, even though she was in Minneapolis. And so they are in retreat on what they say. And that usually means that their action will follow their rhetoric. They will retreat the invasion forces from Minneapolis in the same way that they retreated from Los Angeles, and in the same way that they retreated from Chicago. They will retreat. This is a week of mourning. It should be a week of national mourning when the federal government guns down law-abiding citizens who believed that they lived in a country where the First Amendment protected them on the streets where they lived, and are now dead because they exercised that belief. Renee Good, Alex Preddy. And in this week of mourning, the National Catholic Reporter writes, quote, Catholics must decide if they serve Donald Trump or the gospel. And the National Catholic Reporter is concerned with a new Catholic a particular Catholic, James David Vance, who has been a bit of a wanderer in the wilderness of religion in some portions of his life. He changed his name multiple times and changed his religion a few times. It was not long ago that he moved from atheism to Catholicism, possibly for political reasons before becoming a candidate. So he's new at Catholicism, and he might need more guidance now in his new religion, which might become an increasingly uncomfortable religion for him. Because the National Catholic Reporter says Vice President J.D. Vance reposted Stephen Miller, who on X called Preddy an assassin and who tried to murder federal agents, a statement that is not supported by any evidence. Vance then shared President Donald Trump's lengthy and borderline incomprehensible justification of the shooting. As a Catholic, Vance could have chosen to share the gospel message of healing and human dignity. Instead, he chose to offer the MAGA message of division and blame. Vance's comments are, once again, a moral stain on our collective witness of Catholicism. Yesterday, Pastor Raphael Warnock, who is the current occupant of one of the most important pulpits in American history, the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where Martin Luther King was pastor until his death. Senator Warnock went to Minneapolis and said this.
As I stand where Alex Preddy lost his life in a real sense, I feel like I'm standing on holy ground. And the blood spilled on this ground reminds us that we're in a moral moment in our country. And the soul of our nation is at stake. I am a United States Senator, and so I'm committed to blocking funding for ICE. I'll deal with that later this week as I make my way back to Washington. But as a pastor, I just wanted to be present with the people of Minneapolis who are standing up in such a courageous way. They're standing with their neighbors. I think of Renee Good, who literally put her body on the line to pay the ultimate price. Alex Preddy the same. And all of us in their memory are called to stand up in this moment and summon the better angels of our natures, as Lincoln called it, and say no to this evil that is being unleashed onto our streets.
Say no to this evil that is being unleashed on our streets. And the question becomes, how do we say no? Today, the President of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Archbishop Paul Coakley, issued a statement saying, quote, "The recent killing of 2 people by immigration enforcement officers in Minneapolis and that of a detained man in Texas are just a few of the tragic examples of the violence that represent failures in our society to respect the dignity of every human life. We mourn this loss of life and deplore the indifference and injustice it represents." J.D. Vance would do well to listen to Cardinal Joseph Tobin, the Archbishop of Newark, who has a question for all of us. How will you say no? How will you say no to what Donald Trump is doing, to what Stephen Miller is doing? How will you say no to the cruelty? How will you say no to the lies? How will you say no to the murders?
I think if we are serious about putting our faith in action, we need to say no. Each one of us, and even more importantly, in speaking with others, we'll have to say, how do we say no? Well, in my own faith tradition, I think one way that we say no is that we mourn. We do not celebrate death. And what is probably worse, we do not pretend it doesn't happen. We say names. We pray for the dead. We mourn for a world, a country that allows 5-year-olds to be legally kidnapped and protesters to be slaughtered. I'm speaking to you within a couple of miles of two major detention centers. And everyday people from many faith communities go to Delaney Street here in Newark and to the Elizabeth Detention Center, and they say no by standing at the gates, by talking with the ICE personnel, by insisting on the rights of the detainees within. They bring them human comfort. They console the families of those who aren't always admitted to see their loved ones. How will you say no? How will you say no to violence? Because as the great teacher Martin Luther King said, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. How will you say no? In this week when an appropriations bill is going to be considered in Congress, will you contact your your congressional representatives, the senators and representative from your district? We ask them for the love of God and the love of human beings, which can't be separated. Vote against renewing funding for such a lawless organization. How will you scrawl your answer on the wall? How will you help restore a culture of life in the midst of death? Thank you. God bless you.
How will you say no? Professor Timothy Snyder will try to help us answer that question when he joins us next. Professor Timothy Snyder's new article in the Boston Globe is titled, "The Political Logic of Trump's Violent Lawlessness." Professor Snyder writes, "The moral horror wrought by President Trump's second administration is incontrovertible. The aspiring tyrant looks for cracks in the system that can be pried open. One of these cracks is the border, where the country ends, because the law ends there too. An obvious move for the tyrant is to turn the whole country into a border where no rules apply. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin did this in the 1930s with border zones and deportations preceding the Great Terror. Adolf Hitler did it too in 1938 Germany with immigration raids that targeted undocumented Jews and forced them to flee the country. Trump, by his own admission and that of his cabinet members, is following the same playbook. The border becomes the pretext to undo the law everywhere, at all times, against everyone. It is the crack that can be opened." Joining us now is Timothy Snyder, professor of history at the University of Toronto. He is the author of the New York Times bestsellers On Freedom and On Tyranny. Professor Snyder, I'd like to begin with as the first question with really the title of your piece. What is the political logic of Trump's violent lawlessness?
In order to build tyranny, you have to open zones where the law doesn't apply and where the citizens will accept that the law doesn't apply. One zone like that is a concentration camp. Another zone like that is the border. The logic of what they've been doing with ICE is to take the border everywhere, to take border enforcement everywhere, to take the violence associated with border enforcement everywhere, to try to get the citizenry used to the idea that anywhere in America, at any time, there can be a zone of exception where anything is possible. That's the logic.
You write in your piece that the way the administration uses the word terrorist and extremist is very important to the way they're carrying this out. And we saw them use that word instantaneously after Alex Preddy was murdered.
Yeah, I mean, before I answer that politically, I just can't help but say that it's fundamentally indecent to speak that way of the dead. It's just fundamentally indecent. I mean, there's just a basic violation of everything. I mean, before we even get to America and the Constitution and politics, regardless of any circumstance, you simply don't speak of the dead that way. And when it's possible that you might bear responsibility, the first thing you ought to be doing is taking that responsibility. Okay, having said that, this is very familiar. The idea is to deny the victim their humanity, to turn them into a member of an abstract class, to turn that class into a threat. And calling people terrorists or extremists, or as Stephen Miller did in A Complete Lie, assassins. This is what tyrants do. They take away what's special and particular about us and try to turn us into enemies. And what's depressing about this is not just the evil of it, but the cliched character of it. This is exactly what Putin does. This is exactly what they all do. And we just can't fall for it. Happily, I think we're not falling for it.
You also write in your piece, there's so many language components to this, the invasion of the language and shifting language from neutral descriptions into loaded meanings, and that includes law enforcement. You say state terror is defined as, quote, law enforcement.
I think that sadly, and I think most sadly for people whose job it is, in fact, to enforce the law, what the administration is doing is they've turned law enforcement on its head. They're using it as a kind of verbal protection for any kind of action. It's a kind of magic phrase. As soon as we hear it, we're supposed to think that those people must be doing the right thing. But we have to use our eyes and our ears and our common sense and recognize that somebody wearing a mask who is trespassing, committing assault, committing battery, or committing murder, that is simply not enforcing the law. Enforcing the law is not a thing in the world. It's something you either do or you don't do. And when you're committing crimes, you're not enforcing the law, and you shouldn't be called law enforcement.
We heard Cardinal Tobin in the first segment there ask, how will you say no? And one of the points he made earlier in that video that we didn't show is that for the tyrant, someone just going out into the town square in the middle of the night and just writing the word no, that is in and of itself an act of resistance against the tyrant.
This is absolutely right. It's the beginning of resistance. It's saying no says, this is not normal for me. Saying no says, I've noticed that this has crossed a line. But saying no is also saying yes, because it's the moment where you recognize what are the values for which you will stand with other people, for which you will take some kind of a risk.
Professor Timothy Snyder, thank you very much for starting off our conversations tonight. Thank you. And coming up, after the Archbishop of Newark asked, how will you say no? Today, California's senior senator Alex Padilla asked Republican senators, how many more citizens need to die? Senator Padilla joins us next. Today, California's senior senator Alex Padilla said this.
Our position is clear. Separate the Department of Homeland Security spending bill from the rest of the bills, and let's work on meaningful reforms. But I guess the real question to our Republican colleagues is this: how many more videos do they need to see? How many more masked agents coming out of unmarked cars, kidnapping people off the streets? How many more citizens need to die in broad daylight before they agree enough is enough? There must be real oversight and accountability. Yes, for the agents on the ground, but also from the leaders giving them their orders. ICE and CBP are not above the law.
7.5 months before Donald Trump and Kristi Noem's agents shot and killed Renee Good for no reason and shot and killed Alex Preddy for no reason, they went after a United States senator. In the totally secure safety of the federal building in the Westwood section of Los Angeles, California Senator Alex Padilla tried to ask Kristi Noem a question during a press conference, and Senator Padilla was attacked by Donald Trump and Kristi Noem's federal agents on the scene.
Guys ready? And Bell, sir, hands up, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the secretary, because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your.
I also want to talk about specifically how many of our ICE agents have been docked for doing their duty.
On the ground. On the ground. Hands behind your back. Hands behind your back.
If you let my hands go, put them behind my back.
All right. Cool. One hand. Lay flat. Lay flat.
Other hand, sir.
Other hand. There's no recording allowed out here.
I do not know.
There's no recording allowed out here per FBI regs for the building.
Those federal agents should have been fired immediately for their lawless behavior right there. That is something we have never seen before in the history of the United States. An United States senator, attempted arrest of a United States senator by federal agents physically attacking that senator, throwing him to the floor. That is something no federal agent would dare do until Donald Trump turned them into the most out of control so-called law enforcement group that this country has ever seen. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Alex Padilla of California. He is the top Democrat on the Senate Rules Committee and a member of the Judiciary Committee and the Budget Committee. Senator, thank you very much for being here tonight. And when I see what's happening in Minneapolis, we're seeing a straight up escalation from that day in Westwood where I was watching something that I did not think was possible in this country.
Yep. Well, thanks for having me back, Lawrence. And look, you're absolutely right. As you may recall, I came back from that experience last June and warned my colleagues, both sides of the aisle, that Los Angeles was nothing more than the test case, right? This is the beginning of the escalation of ICE and CBP, not along the border, in the interior, and they were going to push the limits. And we've seen nothing but more and more aggressiveness, aggression, cruelty in these indiscriminate raids. I warned my colleagues that this was the playbook that the Trump administration would use in any city across the country that they wanted to. And what have we seen since? We've seen Washington, D.C., we've seen Chicago, we've seen Portland, we've seen the Carolinas, we're seeing Minneapolis today, now a surge in Maine as well. They need to be reined in. And the loudest message I've had is for my Republican colleagues in Congress, because they're in the majority and they have an opportunity to stand up to the administration and live up to their oath of office as a co-equal branch of government to rein it in. And we have a golden opportunity with the spending bills in front of us right now. No more money for a militarized Trump, ICE, or CBP without true accountability and reforms.
The Democrats appear united on this issue as of now. It seems that the Majority Leader Thune has not indicated that there's any room for negotiation there.
Yeah, well, we're not just talking to Leader Thune. There's a lot of Democrats talking to a lot of Republicans in the Senate, and there does seem to be an openness to at least separating the Department of Homeland Security spending plan from the other 5 bills that are part of this package. I may or may not support those other 5 bills, but there seems to be the support to keep those moving forward. But we cannot, in good conscience, give DHS, ICE, and CBP specifically any more money without these accountability measures. Because look, not a single dollar more while they're roaming the streets, coming out of unmarked cars, masked, not identifying themselves. No more funding for DHS, for ICE, for CBP, while they're detaining innocent children, while they're detaining and even assaulting Latinos for the color of our skin, or because we occasionally speak Spanish. Other language minorities have been subject to this abuse as well. And let's not forget, their budget was tripled by congressional Republicans just last year. So this is not really a question of additional money. This is really a question now of accountability. And what we're asking for is actually pretty common sense. Let the masks come off. Let's turn body cams on. There's no reason each agent shouldn't have a body cam on them. Make sure that they're identifying themselves. When there's an officer-involved shooting, let's do what every other law enforcement entity across the country does and demand an independent investigation and bring forward consequences when officers are found either out of policy or using unwarranted excessive force or violence. This is common sense, but needs to be implemented because this administration on its own isn't going to do it.
When the Trump invasion came to Los Angeles, it certainly had the feeling of something permanent. It had the feeling that they would never leave. But you did get the Trump invasion to go into retreat in California. What is the lesson there that people in Minneapolis should be learning from the retreat in California?
Yeah, well, to be clear and precise here, there is still some ICE and CBP activity happening in different parts of California, not near the volume and the scale that we saw last summer. Where we did prevail was the unlawful federalization and mobilization of National Guard troops into communities in California, even the deployment of Marines in Los Angeles. That we did prevail, and those folks are now either home or back to their primary missions. The lesson is Los Angeles refused to stay quiet. Angelenos protested peacefully, and they spoke up for their neighbors. And that's what we're seeing so beautifully in Minneapolis. So many people refusing to accept this treatment as normal. And they're taking to the streets to peacefully protest. They're having vigils. When there's these raids, there are people out there with their cameras, taking video, taking pictures, documenting. Because if the administration won't hold its own officers accountable, at least the public will. And so they've been so inspiring, not just to the people of California who can relate, but to American citizens all over the country. Let's continue to peacefully protest. Another No King's Day has been announced for next month. And the ultimate protest and pushback is when we go to the ballot box this November.
Senator Alex Padilla, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you. And now to the story that Donald Trump doesn't want anyone talking about, which is why he's trying to put up as many distractions as he can for the last couple of months. Ghislaine Maxwell now claims that there are 25 men who should have been indicted for sex trafficking with Jeffrey Epstein instead of her. That's next with Congressman Ro Khanna. In a habeas petition filed in court claiming she was unfairly prosecuted, Jeffrey Epstein's convicted co-conspirator in sex trafficking, Ghislaine Maxwell, Donald Trump's old friend, said, none of the 4 named co-conspirators or the 25 men with secret settlements were indicted. Ghislaine Maxwell will be deposed by the House Oversight Committee on February 9th. And here's what the Republican chairman of that committee said about Donald Trump answering questions about Jeffrey Epstein.
I'm confident President Trump's going to have to answer, more questions from you all. You're very curious.
To under oath by your committee.
Well, there's never been a sitting president come under oath in an oversight committee hearing, but we'll see what how this plays out. We want to get the truth.
Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California. He's a member of that House Oversight Committee. Congressman Khanna, to Ghislaine Maxwell's claim about 25 men with secret settlements, 4 named co-conspirators, that's from the first attempted prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein that ended up in a non-prosecution agreement. All of those names, everything about that is in the Epstein files that have not yet been released according to the law that you got passed.
Lawrence, the biggest lie in the Epstein cover-up is that Epstein and Maxwell were the only 2 people who abused and raped 1,200 plus survivors. And this keeps getting repeated, even by some well-meaning people. Oh, no one else was involved. And now we have Maxwell telling us that at least 25 other individuals got secret deals. And one of the questions that I'm going to ask her, to be transparent and telegraph it, is who were these 25 individuals? But the reality is, and I know this talking to survivors and survivors' lawyers, those names are in the 302 statements which survivors gave to the FBI, and that needs to be released.
And the Trump Justice Department has just told the federal court yesterday that they don't know. They just don't know when they'll actually be able to comply with the law you passed that required them to have already turned over all of the Epstein files.
Well, look, they're obviously worried. They're filing every few days to Judge Engelmeyer saying, just give us some time. It's going to be very soon. What I don't understand is they've got the most powerful Southern District of New York, a third of the attorneys working on this, and they can't give a date about when they're going to release it. They can't give a roadmap of when they're going to release what. And Lawrence, one of the things I just want to emphasize, it's not how much they release. It's what they release. What we need is the survivors' statements to the FBI where they name other powerful men. What we need is the prosecution memos that explain that charges were dropped. So we don't need some huge data dump. What we need is the very specific information about who was protected and why.
And when parties in discovery are struggling with these kinds of issues, judges can intervene and order the party to turn over the most important stuff. This side wants this. We know you've got a lot to turn over, but give them these pieces first. Is it possible that the judge could issue that kind of order?
Absolutely. You've got two judges, Judge Engelmeyer and Judge Berman. Both have that ability. As you know, the Judge Engelmeyer said that Thomas Massie and I didn't have standing in this issue, but he invited us or survivors to file a lawsuit. And the DOJ is well aware of that. And there are some survivors who are thinking of that. And Judge Berman has said the same in terms of recognizing survivors. So they can do that.
Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Congressman Ro Khanna gets tonight's last word.